thanks for the introduction and for the invitation. It's an honor to be here and on your screen and part of such a really great and important lecture series. So I'm here to talk about my work with the province of Nova Scotia and how I'm working to get Nova Scotia off oil, off coal, and off gas. But first I want to share a bit more about why I'm here talking to you fine folks. So I came to Nova Scotia 10 years ago to do my master's and PhD in physics at Dalhousie, where I focused on battery research. My work was with Dr. Jeff Don, who you may know more recently as developing the million-mile battery and working with Tesla. And my work was to understand why rechargeable lithium-ion batteries fail, how to make them last longer, have higher capacity, and better energy density. And really this work was motivated by climate change because batteries are essential in the transition to renewable energy and for sustainable technologies. I then worked for a battery research development and equipment startup in Halifax for a few years called Novonix. They've since grown tremendously since my time there at 10 to 15 employees, and I don't think they can be called a startup anymore. I then joined the provincial government and I've been here for 3 years. And I'm the manager of the Clean Buildings team in the Clean Energy branch of the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. And basically I work in the areas of energy efficiency and sustainable energy. I'm passionate about the intersection of science, society, and policy. I'm also an advocate for girls and women in science, and I'm a fan of outdoor adventures. So I know that several of the talks as part of this series have been quite technical so far. And my role has really shifted from when I was doing hands-on battery research in the lab to being connected to the science of climate change in a different way. So I can now bring access to science, access to industry into government to help inform policies and programs, and ultimately to have the greatest impact on Nova Scotians. So I really like that there's such a huge opportunity in Nova Scotia despite being a really small province. Just like there's now a battery ecosystem that's come out of the Don Lab, there's several research groups, startups, Tesla Canada has an office here. There's also a lot of people working on climate change in the province. What I really liked about working for the Don Lab was there was so many different backgrounds trying to all tackle the problem of how to improve batteries from a different perspective. So physics, chemistry, engineering. I feel similarly actually working for government and working on climate change in Nova Scotia because there's so many different people working on climate change, as evidenced by this lecture series alone. So it means that all of these different people have their own perspective, their own piece of the pie, trying to solve the puzzle that is climate change. And this is really important because we need all of this different work. There's no silver bullet solution, there's no magic fix. Instead, there's going to be many small and big solutions and progresses that are needed to adapt to a changing climate, mitigate the impacts of climate change, and support those most vulnerable as we make this transition. And working in a small province like Nova Scotia means that I really get to see the impact of my work, which is really cool. So we can talk about some of the specific impacts in Nova Scotia. I don't know if that will go away. Do I have to close these or will they close?
They will close.
Okay, I'll leave it.
This will close, and that you can hide. 2 more. Yeah, right there.
This one? Here we go. Okay. So climate change is causing and will cause several physical impacts. For Nova Scotia, it means that it's going to get warmer and rainier. Our oceans are going to continue to change. Storms will become more intense and more frequent, and sea levels will continue to rise. Now, these impacts often disproportionately affect those most vulnerable. For example, high temperatures affect seniors and those who can't afford or don't have access to air conditioning. And those who can't afford to make their homes more resilient will really feel the impacts of climate change. Now, there's 2 main streams of work within climate change. There we go. Climate adaptation work is preparing for the impacts that I just listed. So this is recognizing that these impacts are happening or will happen, and basically trying to prepare Nova Scotia as much as possible to become more resilient. Climate change mitigation, on the other hand, is reducing climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs. And this is where my work focuses on. So I won't specifically talk about the physical impacts that I just listed on the other slide, but you'll see that mitigating climate change has a wide range of benefits, which also includes becoming more resilient. So in Nova Scotia, climate change mitigation is inherently linked to energy. This is the energy we use to heat our homes, the energy we use to power our cars, and the energy that the electricity grid delivers. So the best and only way for Nova Scotia to reduce climate change is by getting off oil, off coal, and off gas. And this means that we need to have dedicated efforts to do these three things. This work will also affect and involve vulnerable populations and vulnerable Nova Scotians. And not all Nova Scotians have the same ability in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. This is because there's, different access to supports and programs and concerns over affordability. So it means that specific support is needed for these groups of people. Before I get into that, and I'll talk a little bit about the department that I work for, I did want to pause to say that fighting climate change through both adaptation and mitigation work does require a significant investment. Halifax is committed to this. They've imposed increased property taxes to fund their climate plan called Halifax. The province is also committed to this, and their climate plan was released in December by the Department of Environment and Climate Change. And while this work costs money, there's also a really huge opportunity for us here, especially in Nova Scotia. There's so many other benefits to fighting climate change beyond the environmental benefits and the survival of humanity and all that. There's also economic benefits, social benefits, health benefits. And I think that piece is really important to remember as we're all trying to move, in this clean transition. So I work for the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, or NRR. It's a new provincial department that was formed after the last election in fall of 2021. It merged the departments of Energy and Mines, which is where I worked, and Lands and Forestry. They have quite a broad mandate, which is listed at the top here, and I won't read it aloud for you. But it's been really interesting to be joined with Lands and Forestry because it means we're now working with people who work in parks and lands across the province, which is really cool. So they have a few goals that relate to clean energy, and you can see them here. And it includes advancing the development of renewable energy, reducing GHGs, continuing to electrify transportation, and also phasing out coal-fired electricity. Both of these goals will help us to our legislated goal of being 80% renewable by 2030. And our department is also dedicated to supporting and strengthening efficiency in Nova Scotia and supporting sustainable business development. Now, I work for the clean energy branch within the department, and we're responsible for working on policies and programs related to all things clean energy and climate change. We're a group of about 20 or so, shout out to the two in the front here, and we have several goals and priorities that are listed here. So we want to reduce GHGs, create good local jobs, elevate Nova Scotian leadership, reduce energy poverty, and support communities and healthy populations. Now, in everything that we do in our branch, we consider equity and inclusion a top priority. We want to make sure that the transition to a low carbon economy is a just transition. And as we work towards these goals, we want to ensure that there's support for all communities, that we focus on local, that we work with industry, and that we really listen, learn, and engage with our communities in the province. We also have some legislative goals, which you can see at the bottom here. So we're legislated to reduce our GHG emissions by 53% below the 2005 levels. We're supposed to do that by 2030, and then be net zero or achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And as I already mentioned, we have another goal of having 80% of our electricity come from renewable sources by 2030. Now, I want to focus on these two pieces and why they're particularly important in the Nova Scotia context, and why my work must be intentional in addressing energy poverty, equity, and inclusion. So this figure shows the percentage of households living in energy poverty for each province, as well as the Canadian average in reddish orange there. And energy poverty means that people are struggling to pay their energy bills. So while low and median income families struggle the most, Canadians at all levels can actually be experiencing energy poverty. You'll see here that Nova Scotia and the other Atlantic provinces have an incredibly high rate of energy poverty. So we're looking at around 40% of all households living in energy poverty. And this is twice the national rate, which is really alarming. And the main reason for this is because high energy prices are here in the province, especially for oil heat. And really with the recent increases to energy prices that we've seen this past year, or sort of 2022, we're actually expecting that close to 50% of all households in the province are living in energy poverty. So half of all Nova Scotian homes use heating oil still. That's not a thing in other provinces. And this happens especially in rural areas in the province. Despite being a very small portion of the population, Nova Scotia actually uses 1/3 of all heating oil in the country. This is really expensive, has very unstable prices, and these dollars don't actually stay in the province. They go to the provinces that actually provide the oil. So this means that we really need to focus specific funding to reduce oil and support low-income families and families living in energy poverty. The good news is that $140 million was announced in December, and this funding is to support residential efficiency programs to address energy poverty and equity, and specifically to move people off of heating oil. This is in addition to programs that have been going on for over 10 years that support efficiency work in general. Now, electricity prices and transportation options also contribute to high energy poverty rates here. So this graph has very small text, but the important thing is that it's showing electricity prices in Canadian cities over the last few years. Halifax is highlighted here, way at the top. The current residential rate from Nova Scotia Power is 16.2 cents per kilowatt hour. This is really high compared to, will this work? No. Toronto down low, and Montreal is the very bottom one, incredibly low compared to Halifax and Nova Scotia. So we've typically had consistently high electricity rates. We also are really at risk of fuel prices changing, and we have many rural areas and limited public transportation options. This means that with rising gas prices, those in rural areas and those living with low incomes are impacted the most. And these things also contribute to the high rates of energy poverty. So with that in mind, with high energy rates, with high rates of energy poverty, and other unique circumstances in the province, how does our branch actually do this work and achieve these objectives? We achieve the objectives through many ways, including programs and policies, supports for communities, developing the workforce and providing training opportunities, leveraging funding from other sources such as federal sources, and collaborating with other provincial departments, municipalities, communities, not-for-profits, and industry. But you'll hear some examples of the work in each of these areas, but the main way we achieve these objectives is by having 3 teams. Let me close this again.
Yeah, sorry.
But we'll see if it lasts. So these teams, clean electricity, clean buildings, and clean transportation, are dedicated to the 3 biggest GHG emitters, the biggest GHG emitting sectors in Nova Scotia. So the clean electricity team works to move Nova Scotia off coal. The clean buildings team, which I'm the manager of, works to move Nova Scotia off of heating oil. And the clean transportation team works to move Nova Scotia off of gas. Here you can see the breakdown of the GHG emissions by sector in Nova Scotia. So again, we've got electricity, transportation, and buildings. Buildings is the smallest of the 3 right now, but as the electricity grid becomes cleaner, again, we're working towards 80% renewable by 2030, the overall share of the buildings GHGs will increase. Ultimately, this means we need to get off coal, off oil, and off gas. And I'm going to go through some main ways that we're doing that in each of these teams. So here you can actually see some history of the GHG emissions by sector over the last few years, as well as the pathway forward. So you can see the laser's not going to work. So you can see the dot there. That's our target for 2030. You can also see our pathway forward to net zero by 2050. A key piece in reaching these goals is having a cleaner grid. So our clean electricity team works to ensure that our electricity is renewable and reliable while helping Nova Scotians access renewable energy. You can see that the amount of coal in gray, dark gray here, has decreased from 2005 to 2019, but we still have an incredibly coal dependent electricity grid. In the 2019 chart, you can see in green at the top there is a sizable amount of wind, but that's going to need to increase dramatically in order to achieve our goal of being 80% renewable by 2030. So this slide actually shows the electricity or the energy generation that's expected and needed in 2031 to meet our goals. You'll notice that wind energy becomes 70% of our energy mix. That is a big increase. It's also expected that solar and batteries will contribute. Batteries are very important in the transition to renewable energy because we need to be able to store renewable energy when it's generated, when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, to be able to deliver it even when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. So how do we get to 70% wind? The answer is by doing a massive procurement of renewable energy. So in 2022, our department or our branch launched a competitive process to source renewable energy for Nova Scotians. So organizations could propose projects that fit within the pricing criteria. And this first procurement has closed and 5 projects have been selected. All of these projects are wind energy projects and they total 372 megawatts of energy. This is 12% of Nova Scotia's electricity. This is really huge. These projects will also be deployed by the end of 2025. They're going to save ratepayers $120 million every year. Ratepayers are people who pay Nova Scotia Power energy bills, probably everyone in this room and on the call. And even better, all of these projects are majority owned by Mi'kmaq. So this is a really great example of a GHG reducing project. 1 million tons of GHGs will be reduced every year, but there's so many other benefits. So there's savings for Nova Scotians, there's less pollution, there's local jobs, there's Mi'kmaq ownership, and less dependence on imported coal, and therefore very uncertain prices that we have less ability to control. So there's another procurement expected. This will add maybe 250 megawatts or more. So let's call it another 10% of our grid. And that's really exciting work. Now, the electricity team also works to get off coal through energy storage, including batteries and solar programming. For example, the Solar Homes program offers rebates to homeowners to install solar on their houses. This is to help with affordability. But I know that the cost of solar is still high. That's still very, far out of reach for a lot of Nova Scotians. And not everyone has a suitable property for solar, and not everyone owns their home. So a new community solar program is in the works. This will help assist those unable to install solar at their own place of residence, including low and middle income families. So this program is in progress right now, and it's expected to launch later this year. There's also the Green Choice program. This is for large electricity consumers to choose to have 100% of their electricity come from renewable sources. Again, there's so many benefits to having a renewable and reliable grid, including good local jobs, being self-sufficient, not reliant on imported fuel and unstable prices that we can't control. Now, it's also really important to reduce our electricity demand and our energy demand, especially because we recognize that there's a lot of technologies that are actually going to increase our electricity demand. So we need to reduce and conserve as much as we can where we can. So this is things like energy efficiency retrofits and ensuring new buildings are as efficient as possible. That's through things like insulation, better windows and doors, efficient appliances, draft proofing, that sort of thing. Efficiency is best to be done first, then add renewables and switching to electric efficient heating sources for homes and businesses. So the Clean Buildings team, my team, is dedicated to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and basically reducing electricity demand through efficiency upgrades while also helping Nova Scotians be more comfortable in their home and save money. So we're actually a leader in energy efficiency programming, and our efficiency programs have had massive success in reducing GHGs, having savings for Nova Scotians, and actually creating 2,600 jobs across the province. Because of this, we were just ranked #1 in efficiency programs and #2 overall by Efficiency Canada for their fall efficiency scorecard. And that ranks all provinces. We've typically done very well, #1 in efficiency programs. We've just moved up from 3rd place to 2nd place overall, beating Quebec, only behind BC. So energy efficiency is really the #1 tool that Nova Scotians have to control their energy bills and cut their energy bills while providing other benefits like good local jobs. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done. As I mentioned, there's very high oil prices. There's a lot of people living in energy poverty. So it means that we have an opportunity to do more across the province. So one way we do that is working with Efficiency Nova Scotia. And this is the efficiency utility for the province. And they work to reduce GHGs and electricity demand through a variety of programs. Some of the programs are as simple as an automatic rebate when you buy an efficient product at a store, to providing support for small businesses as they want to become more efficient, and a lot of programs for homeowners as well. So the home warming program is a really great example of Nova Scotian success. This program has provided free energy retrofits for low-income families for over 10 years, and it generally cuts bills by over $900 each year for these families. The program has helped create jobs across the province, and ultimately it helps Nova Scotians be more comfortable in their homes while saving money. So I mentioned before that $140 million in provincial funding was announced in December. Part of these funds will be adding free heat pumps to this program for low-income families that use oil heat. And this is going to lead to even more GHG reductions, even more savings for these families. And heat pumps are really great because it not only reduces people's oil use or gets them off oil, it helps them save money, but it also provides cooling in the summer, which we're going to need more and more as we start to feel the impacts of climate change. Now, the only problem with programs like this, I'll just close these others is that home ownership can actually be a barrier. So this is particularly an issue for First Nation communities, where most residents don't actually own their home, as well as for African Nova Scotian communities. So for example, you can't get a loan against your house if you don't own it. You can't qualify for a lot of these Efficiency Nova Scotia programs. And it means that the support that's available to other Nova Scotians is really lacking for these communities that already face additional barriers and inequities. So for that reason, we started the Mi'kmaq Home Energy Efficiency Program, which is provincially and federally funded. And this project is really incredible because it's going to see all homes in all 13 First Nation communities across the province receive free retrofits. So this is like insulation, heat pumps, better air proofing or air sealing and draft proofing. And the work has been underway for a few years now, and it will continue until all homes are done. So about 2,600 homes across the province. Where possible, Indigenous businesses actually do the retrofit work. So they're the ones going in, installing insulation, installing heat pumps. In some cases, there aren't businesses within the communities. So we're working on increasing training for community members and supporting local businesses. So for example, we need to be really intentional in reaching underrepresented and underserved groups. And in all of the training and all of the workforce that's needed in the clean energy sector, we need to prioritize equity and inclusion. So one thing I've been doing is I've worked really closely with the Clean Foundation. They've been developing and delivering training opportunities. This particular example, it was a training opportunity focused on supporting racialized and Indigenous workers to become either certified energy advisors. These are the people who would go into your home, do an assessment, determine what retrofit measures actually should be done. They're certified by Natural Resources Canada, as well as training efficiency tradespeople. So the people that are installing heat pumps, doing installation, that sort of thing. So this work started with 2 pilots to train racialized and Indigenous workers. We've since expanded with $2 million to do more of this across the province, as well as increased training opportunities within other organizations, even outside of Clean. So kind of getting into like NSCC or other institutions that are in this space. The great thing about this work with Clean is that all participants would actually come out of the program with the materials they need. So with their toolkit or their blower door kit to do assessments, they've got the certifications they need, and really all the skills to be able to go work for any service organization that's offering this type of work in the province or the country, really. And this is just one example. We need a lot more training for the whole clean energy sector. So we need more people who are going to install heat pumps. We need more people who are going to be trained in servicing electric vehicles. We need more people who are going to be maintaining wind turbines when we get to 70% wind. So this is just a start, and we need to make sure that equity and inclusion is baked into all of those opportunities. So the Clean Buildings team, as I mentioned, is working to get Nova Scotia off of oil. We do that through other programs as well, in addition to the ones I mentioned. Also by supporting the building code development so that we can actually meet our net zero by 2050 goals. And again, there's so many additional benefits to getting off of oil and improving efficiency. So there's better air quality, healthier communities, lots of local jobs. And again, we're not reliant on an imported fuel, which also means we can boost the local economy. There we go. Okay. So now our clean transportation team works to get Nova Scotia off of gas by building safe and connected and healthy communities by increasing active transportation and electric transportation options. So there's two main ways to get off of gas. One is by electrifying transportation, so electric vehicles, electric buses. The other is by reducing reliance on gas-powered transportation, so active transportation, easier cycling, walking, commuting routes, basically. So to set the context, Canada has a mandate that by 2026, 20% of all vehicle sales will be electric vehicles. By 2030, 60% of sales will be EVs. And then by 2035, no gas cars will be sold. And that's not that far away. So there's a lot of benefits to switching to EVs. Nova Scotians pay a staggering $6+ billion to operate their cars every year, which was a fact that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And gas prices rose to over $2 per liter this year. It's since gone back down, but really it's unstable and we don't have great control over those prices, and it's dependent on global issues. So the more that we can change that, become a bit more self-sufficient, the better. It also means that low-income families and those in rural areas who don't have any or very limited transportation options are most affected. So for this reason, Nova Scotia started an incentive program which provides up to $3,000 for an electric vehicle, and this can be added to the $5,000 federal rebate. So you're looking at $8,000 to help purchase an electric vehicle. Now, I recognize that cars are already expensive and electric vehicles have an even greater upfront cost most of the time. And the great thing about this rebate program is we actually provided rebates for e-bikes. So these are electric bikes. And the most amazing thing that happened was over 3,400 people use this rebate. That's like 4 times the amount that actually use the rebate for electric vehicles. And this shows that Nova Scotians are really interested in active transportation. They're interested in an affordable transportation solution. It also means we need to continue to invest in active transportation routes so that people can have safe options and accessible options to be able to walk or roll or cycle to get sort of between communities and within communities. So here's a photo of a few of our branch test driving some e-bikes at Zen e-bikes. They're a company that makes e-bikes in Halifax. It's led by someone who also worked with Jeff Don. And I would say if you get a chance to try not only a Zen e-bike, but any electric bike, I would take it. They're very fun. They're very great. Gets you where you need to go fast and can be a real, solution instead of a vehicle, especially if there's good active transportation routes. Now, I have to talk about charging because anytime I bring up electric vehicles, people ask questions about charging. So I wanted to show a map here. This is an outdated map. This is from 2019, and it shows the charging infrastructure across the province, which is really useful to see, although most charging of electric vehicles is actually done at home through a level 1 or a level 2 charger. A level 1 charger is a typical 120-volt plug. A level 2 charger is like a kitchen stove, so that could be installed in your house, provides faster charging than the level 1. Now, of course, even if most charging is done at home, we need to have a really robust charging network, across the province. And we're working to expand the network with the installation of new fast chargers or level 3 chargers. And we're also working to support multi-unit residential buildings because it can be really difficult if you don't have a driveway to find appropriate charging solutions. So that goes for people who maybe live in Halifax and don't have a driveway at all, people in apartment buildings, condos, that sort of thing. So the clean transportation team, as I said, is working to get off gas by investing in electric public transportation. And that includes electric buses for HRM and CBRM, as well as electric ferries, and really focusing on better active transportation options because these are key to facilitate reducing or removing car dependency. Again, all of this work leads to healthier communities, better air quality, and actually boosts tourism in the areas that have these types of routes. Now, I want to share an example that I love that links all these teams, and I'll just close this again. And so I think it's safe to say everyone here remembers Hurricane Fiona. Okay. So this storm had high winds, a lot of rain. It left a lot of damage in its wake. And it also left many without power for days or longer. And a colleague of mine was without power for 5 days, but she had an electric vehicle, which you can see here. This is a Hyundai Ioniq 5. And the cool thing about this electric vehicle is you can actually do bi-directional charging with it. So what that means is that the capacity of the EV battery can be both charged and discharged, which means you can plug your devices into the battery and use the battery to power your devices. So that's what she did. She helped power her home and some friends' homes for the 5 days that she was without power, still had battery capacity left at the end of those 5 days when her power finally came back to her house. So this is a really cool example. Now, vehicle to grid integration is when you combine bi-directional charging, so that ability to charge or discharge the vehicle battery with a connection to the grid, or vehicle to building would be a connection to a building. So you can kind of see here, basically you have an electric vehicle connected to a charger that could then feed into the home or the grid, and vice versa, be charged by the grid as well. This could allow for more renewable energy because there's going to be a lot of electric vehicles in the province, which is a lot of potential battery storage in the province. It also means that you can set your vehicle to do smart charging. So when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, you can have your app and you can say that that's when you want to have your vehicle be charged, when renewables are in abundance. And if they're not in abundance, you don't need to charge your vehicle at the time. Now, I want to think about this example on a different scale. So instead of using batteries from EVs to help homeowners, how can we use them to help communities? So I think electric school buses demonstrates the benefits of electric vehicles and vehicle to grid really well. So children are at increased risk from poor air quality from vehicles and school bus pollution. They're also at like the exact right height of exhaust, which is bad for their health. And electric school buses will be able to support healthy populations while also reducing GHG emissions. Now, vehicle to grid capability can enable the grid to accommodate more renewable energy and benefit communities. So, for example, electric school buses that actually have vehicle to grid or vehicle to building capability could actually act as a battery backup to schools or to community centers. So, for example, there's a power outage or extreme weather event. The battery from an electric school bus could power a comfort center in a community to provide warmth, food, shelter for those who need it. And this is really helpful because schools have a defined bus route, they have defined times, consistency, and they can really have the demonstration of how this can function, how to use vehicle to grid to help our communities. So I love this example because it not only shows multitudes of benefits like better air quality, but it also combines the work of all 3 teams in our ranch, because buildings will need to be, ready to support charging infrastructure and bi-directional charging. We'll need to have the availability and the uptake of electric vehicles and electric school buses. And there also is going to need to be work with the electricity grid and the electric utility. So to summarize the benefits of getting off coal, off gas, and off oil, I just want to remind you of how many other benefits there are. It's not just about reducing GHGs, but we're going to see so many other things like good and local jobs, healthier communities, more comfortable in our homes while saving money. But we're also going to be self-sufficient because we're not reliant on imported fuels. We're going to have, the ability to support local, which is going to boost our economy. So I know I have a little bit of time left, so I wanted to share a few more examples of projects across the province. So I spoke about some programs through Efficiency Nova Scotia, but we also support organizations for projects, including large infrastructure projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions through other provincial and federal programs. So a main component of most of these programs is that there needs to be a public or community benefit, and they need to reduce GHGs. So here's a few examples. I'll just go one by one. Let's see. So at the top, we've got a public housing retrofit project. So this is a really great project that is retrofitting public housing units across the province. So this is housing for low-income individuals. Phase 1 has already been underway for a few years, and phase 2 is just getting started now. And the cool thing about phase 2 is all of the retrofits are actually going to include getting the units fully off oil. So replacing oil tanks, installing fully electric efficient equipment. This is going to save a lot of money. Again, make people more comfortable, add that cooling in the summer that's really needed. And that will be done across the province. Another great project is a community solar project. So this was actually a project that we supported in the feasibility and design work through a provincial program. Then they went on to get some large infrastructure funding from the federal government and provincial government. And it's run by the Alternative Resource Energy Authority, or AREA, which is a municipal electric utility. And they are installing an 8.8 megawatt solar garden in Mahone Bay, Antigonish, and Berwick. So this is a really big solar garden. It's the first utility scale solar project in Atlantic Canada. And they're under construction right now. I think if you go to any of those 3 places, you'll see the construction of the solar gardens in each place. Now, there's also a local construction here. It's the Halifax Water Cogswell District Energy System. So you may have noticed some construction downtown, perhaps disrupting your flow into downtown. They're tearing up the entire Cogswell area. It's part of a whole Cogswell redevelopment. There's going to be 6 new mixed-use buildings. There's going to be new active transportation throughout. A big piece is this district energy system. So a Halifax wastewater plant is actually just sort of up the street. They'll be using that to serve as a district energy system to actually heat and cool the new buildings that will be in place in the next few years. I forget how long it's going to take. And so that's a federally and provincially funded project. The district energy system itself is $14 million. And lastly, we have a lot of active transportation networks being built across the province. One notable example is in Port Hawkesbury in Cape Breton. There's going to be 5 core active transportation routes, and these are going to connect residences with rec facilities, the NSCC campus, and retail. This is a $3 million project, and it's really important to be able to get people out walking, cycling, rolling within the community and between communities. And this is going to allow people to have less dependency on their gas vehicles. So I've talked about a lot of work today. I could probably talk about a lot more, and I'll leave some time for questions. But one thing I wanted to mention is that collaboration is really, really key to our work. So we work very closely with the Department of Environment and Climate Change, for example, on the development and now the delivery of their climate plan that came out in December. We work with Municipal Affairs and Housing for building code support, as well as retrofits. We work with other provincial departments on their clean energy projects. We also work with not-for-profits, including Efficiency Nova Scotia and the Clean Foundation. We work with academia, industry, and industry associations. That's also really helpful when we're working on training and developing the workforce. We work with communities and municipalities. They always need more support for their projects and funding as well. And then we also work with individual Nova Scotians just like you. So there's really a lot of exciting work happening in the province right now. And there's a lot more that we need to do. There's still a lot of high energy prices. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done to actually get Nova Scotia off coal. off oil and off gas. But it's really exciting to be part of the clean energy branch right now and part of a crew of, even people through this lecture series who are passionate and motivated to continue working on these problems. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions that you have.